Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on how to nail your question and answer session, also known as Q&A. One of the things I see quite often, because I attend a lot of seminars, is I watch people present beautifully. They've got their content all organized, they've got it structured beautifully, and then they go into that Q&A. Or the MC says, does anyone have any questions? And if you're speaking on anything that's a little bit contentious, that's bad news, that's change, people resist change, that is unpopular, the questions can often be quite difficult. And people suddenly, as a speaker, their credibility, their poise, their presence starts to disappear, starts to gradually go downhill as they struggle to answer that question. And everything else they've said before that is brought into question, seems to suffer just by their inability to remain calm and respond confidently to the Q&A session. So welcome. My aim in the 30 minutes I have with you is to make you more effective the next time you have to deal with Q&A. And these models work for boardroom, for meetings, as well as the formal presentation Q&A that you often have at the end. For those of you who haven't attended before, please ask questions as you go. You've got that question box. I won't be able to use the models in responding to question via webinar that I'm going to teach you. Feel free to take notes and try and think and apply some of what I'm saying to your own personal situation. Good way to do that is cast your mind back to a presentation where you've had Q&A. Is there anything you could have done differently as a result of what I'm sharing with you today? Or cast your mind forward. Do you have a presentation coming up? Do you have a meeting coming up? Can you use some of the information I'm sharing with you today to better deal with questions and answers in a future meeting, in a future presentation? Good morning, Carlina. We're just underway. Okay, I'm hearing that my voice is breaking up a little. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut my webcam down. Okay, I need to shut it down. Stop sharing. I'm hoping that'll clear up a little bit of bandwidth. Thanks, Sue, for that remark. So apply some of what you've learned to your own personal situation. The agenda for the 30 minutes that I have, a little bit of introduction about Q&A, some general tips, an eloquent model, an eloquent and dynamic model. Just a further layering on the model is called the bucket model. And what if you don't know the answer? What if you don't have the answer to the question that you've been asked? So that's what I'm planning to cover in the 30 minutes that I have with you. Starting off, an introduction. Q&A is simply a prepared presentation. Do your preparation and use a structure. The mistakes that people do is they do not prepare for a Q&A session. They do not anticipate questions, and they just say stuff without any structure. So the preparation is around knowing who's going to be in the room. Are you delivering good news or are you delivering bad news? What do they want from you? What question don't you want to be asked? What question, if I ask that of you, will make you feel very uncomfortable? Prepare an answer for those two questions. Don't walk into a room without doing that preparation for the types of question people might ask. So So let's do some background on how you can prepare for your Q&A. We'll talk about structure a little bit later on. So some general tips. Your preparation. It's called environmental scanning. Who's going to be in the room? If you're talking about removing budget, you're talking about a change management process, you're talking about downsizing, right-sizing, restructuring, put yourself in your audience's footsteps and anticipate the questions that they're going to ask you. If you were in the role of the people you're speaking to, what questions would you ask? What difficult questions? What uncomfortable questions? And prepare answers for that. Set the rules up front for your Q&A. When I did a workshop on Monday, I had 7 hours. My rule was quite simple, that ask questions as we go. I've got a whole day with you. If you have any questions, if you disagree with me, if you want me to expand, just let me know. I can deal with that there and then. So that rule is, please ask questions as we go. If you're speaking for 30 minutes, as I did on Tuesday morning, probably if you allow for Q&A as you go, a question early on could hijack your agenda and you may not cover your content. So if I was speaking for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, one of the things I would say up front, please leave your questions towards the end and I'll answer as many questions as I can. So when someone interrupts and say, hey, Peter, but what about this? I can say, look, please, if you don't mind, I did ask if we can hold the questions to the end. So set the rules up front. Let's say you have a big audience and a short time to answer questions, and you want to give as many people an opportunity to ask questions as possible. One of the rules might be, now I'm here for 30 minutes. There's a lot of people in the room and I know there's going to be lots of questions. Can I please ask you all to limit it to one question per person? If you have additional questions, please email me and I'll answer those questions after the session. That way you can stop someone from hijacking the agenda, someone from being persistent and keep asking multiple questions. Because when you've answered their question, and it may be a difficult question, but when you've answered it and they come back with a second question, you've now got permission from the room to say, look, excuse me, we did all agree one question per person. Can you please hold that question and have a chat to me at morning tea break? Or can you hold that question and shoot me an email after my presentation and I'll try and answer the question then. I've got other questions over here I need to move on to. So set the rules of how you're going to handle your Q&A. In big audiences, it may be that you've got people walking around with pieces of paper. If you have a question, attract the attention of one of the people in the room and write your question down. They'll sort them into themes and I'll answer all the questions at the end of my presentation. So you'll know what kind of meeting, what kind of seminar, what kind of conference you're speaking at. You'll know how much time you've got. You'll know the best way to deal with Q&A, but let people know up front. If I shut you down, ask you to hold your question to the end, mid-presentation without forewarning you, that may make me look disrespectful. That may make me look as though I'm avoiding your question. If I've laid it down in black and white up front, please ask questions as we go. Please hold your questions to the end. Please write your questions down on a piece of paper. Then I have made it clear how I'm going to handle that question. Set the scope. This is what you're here to talk about and what you're not here to talk about. With change management process, for example, your role may be to outline the new policy, the implementation and the strategy for rolling it out. Your role may be not to talk about financial implications, not to talk about budget strain. So if in your introduction of your presentation, you set the scope. So thank you for inviting me today. I'm going to talk about the rollout and the logistical concerns of this new policy. I cannot talk about financial impact. I cannot talk about budgets. Should you have any concerns or questions, please go direct to the finance department. I now start delivering my content. Bill to the side is not very happy because his budget's already strained. Q&A, he asked me about, but I can't afford this change, Peter. I can immediately respond respectfully and say, look, I understand that. I have no control over budget or finance. You need to speak to the finance department. I'm here to talk to you about how we're going to implement it and the rollout. This will help you keep things in scope and within material that you know, and it'll narrow the range of questions. So feel free to let people know what you will talk about and what you are unable to talk about. Anticipate tricky questions. This is getting in your audience's footsteps. So if you are responsible for finance, you are in the finance department, and you're talking about a policy or a change process that will have significant financial implications for different departments, you know they're going to ask about, but my budget's already in strife. How am I going to be able to do this new policy? And you will have that answer prepared. Move into your audience's footsteps, put on their thinking cap. What are they going to ask you? Anticipate those tricky questions. What question don't you want to be asked? What question, if I ask it of you, will make you feel uncomfortable? Prepare answers for those questions. Know your topic. Know your topic inside out. It's really hard if you present on someone else's topic. Let's say human resources gives you a deck of PowerPoint slides, a change management process the night before, and they want you to go and talk about this change, this new policy to staff. You've had no time to prepare. It's a human resource policy. It's not even your own policy. That's really hard work. And your ability to answer questions will suffer. So know your topic inside out. Know a little bit of the history, know the future, know the trends. What are people doing in your area? What are they doing overseas? What are the Canadians doing? What are the British doing? What are the Americans doing? So you've got some trends and some depth. And if you need to build credibility, so you're talking about doing something a different way. And this seems really crazy, and the people in the room are angry. And you can say, well, the Canadians trialled this new model of social housing. They trialled it 5 years ago, and what they've done is they've increased housing availability by 25%. The Canadians tried this new process 10 years ago, and they've increased productivity by 15%, and no one lost their jobs. So by knowing your topic in a wide spectrum, what they've done in Sydney, what they've done overseas, you can add credibility and you show that you've got depth of knowledge. That's a great way to handle questions. Moving on to a model. This is a dynamic model. It's an eloquent model. You can Google Q&A models. You'll have a plethora, a whole range of different models. This is one that I use and I find fairly adaptable and a great way to respond to questions. The first thing is repeat the question. 3 reasons to repeat the question. As you repeat the question, you're buying yourself a little bit of time. So you'd like to know what my view is on whether we should pipe drinking water from Lake Argyle in the north of West Australia down to Perth so that we can secure Perth's water supply. You'd like to know my view on that. See how I've said nothing? And this allows me to gather my thoughts, to pack, to rack, to stack, to organise my knowledge into a format that makes sense. So repeating the question, a common mistake is to fire straight away, foot in mouth, answer with your first thought, and then you've got nowhere to go. So repeating the question allows you to buy time. That's the first reason. The second reason, as you repeat the question towards the person who is asking the question, if they nod their head up and down, then you're on the right page. If they shake their head from side to side, you've misunderstood the question. Can you please repeat the question? So as I repeat the question, I glance at the asker of the question and check that they're nodding up and down. And the third reason, in larger groups, often a person down the front will ask a question before the microphone, the roving microphone, gets there. The speaker hears it, is on the page, no one else in the room heard the question, and they start answering, and we haven't heard the question. I hear this quite often. So the third reason for repeating the question is it just ensures everyone's on the same page. Create relevance for the whole audience. This means chunking it up. Why do I care? One person has asked a very narrow question. If I answer that without making it relevant to everyone in the room, I risk losing the attention of the rest of the audience. So if someone asks a narrow question, why does everyone else need to hear the answer? Let me demonstrate a way of chunking it up. So I'm going to ask a very narrow question of myself. So Peter, do you think the new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes is a valuable tool? So I'm a biochemist by training, and I can imagine 90% of people in my audience glazing over. DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes. Huh? So let me demonstrate how I can chunk it out. So I'll repeat the question first. So thanks, Peter. My understanding is you want to know whether I think this new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes is going to be a good technology. I think everyone in the room would agree that anything that helps our children across Australia get that early diagnosis of their diabetes and move on to live normal, healthy lives with diabetes would be a valuable tool. The really clever people in responding to questions make it relevant to everyone in the room. Be concise, keep it simple. Don't become too verbose. Make eye contact with everyone in the room. So here's another mistake. Room of 50 people. One person on the left asks a question. I look at that person and I speak to that person for the next 3 minutes as if they're the sole person in the room. When someone asks you a question, they've now given you a topic to do a mini presentation to everyone in the room. Please make eye contact with everyone. Eye contact first with the asker of the question. As you repeat, check the nod. Now as you create relevance and you respond, make eye contact with everyone in the room. It's a mini presentation. And finally, sum up and then thank the questioner. And I'll bring my eye contact back. Thanks for your question, Peter. Now, here's the thing. Do you want to end the question, or do you want to give the person a further chance at answering the question? If you say to that person, does that answer your question? You're giving them another chance to come back. No, Peter, that's not what I meant. Or yes, that does, but what I really want to know is this. If you're speaking for 20 minutes, you don't want to say to someone, does that answer your question? Because they may come back and all of a sudden no one else gets a chance to answer a question. So in a contentious topic, I would want to manage my Q&A tightly, and I would say thank you for the question, and my palm would be facing down as I'd point to them, thank you for your question. My voice would be steady, and that would be almost not shutting them down, but the stop sign. So thanks for your question, Peter. And my other hand I can move out, so I've got another question over here. So there's a dynamic model that you can adjust depending on the situation. So let me give you some further examples. Don't repeat the question at small meetings. That seems a little bit silly. Do repeat the question at job interviews. Yep, there's 3 or 4 people at the interview panel and they're asking you that 2-part, 3-part question. Can you give me an example of when you've used your interpersonal skills to resolve conflict and you were not able to resolve that conflict? What did you learn from that situation? What would you do differently the next time you had 2 people that had conflict? That triple barrel question. So you want to know when I used my interpersonal skills to resolve conflict, yeah, and I wasn't able to resolve conflict. And the second part was, what did I learn from that? And I think the third part was, what would I do differently to make sure that difficult conversation, that negotiation went more effectively? And I'll check the nod from the interview panel. Once again, that's buying me time to answer the question. But if I said that in front of a meeting room table with 5 people, that's going to sound silly. But don't chunk up at job interviews. So the reason you want to know whether I've got good interpersonal skills is clearly within the workplace there will be difficult conversations, there will be conflict. You don't need to make relevant to the interview panel. They're people in that job. Do make relevant at boardroom or at meeting. So if someone asks you a question and everyone else in the room, it's not relevant to them, why are you answering that question if the other 5 people don't need to know? You can have a chat with that person in the corridor or one-on-one. So if the finance person says, look, our budget's really struggling at the moment, and you've got marketing and you've got operations and you've got human resources and you've got strategic planning in the room, and you're just talking about money, why do they need to know? So yes, we are a little bit tight with the budget at the moment. So from a marketing perspective, please, can you shave 2% off our marketing budget over the next 6 months? From a HR perspective, no more advertisements. If any people leave, no more recruitment advertisements. We're not going to fill any places for the next 6 months. From a strategic planning, we'd love your way of identifying strategies where we can be productive and maybe make some savings. So make it relevant to everyone in the meeting. I've covered eye contact with everyone. Even at the boardroom meeting, at job interview, the mistake is one person asks the question in a 3 or 4 person interview panel, and the applicant delivers the response solely to the person asking the question. Please, eye contact with everyone. And here is the palms up. If you're brainstorming, if you're facilitating, you may want to milk questions. Can you add anything else to that? And I've got a little bit of a rise and fall in my voice. Can you tell me more about, does anyone else have anything else that they'd like to add? This is a facilitation response. 20 minutes, you've got to keep it sharp, palms down, stop sign. Thanks for your question, Peter. We've got another question over here. So you can decide whether you want more questions or whether you need to keep it tight. So I need to move on quickly. The bucket model. This is frequently asked questions. Henry Kissinger said, "What questions do you have for my answers?" And you can prepare 10 or 15 eloquent answers. One will be around quality, one will be around safety, one will be around return on investment, one will be around well-being. And as soon as someone asks a question, and you'll hear the crux, the key word is they're worried about money, they're worried about the cost, they're worried about finance. That comes out of the finance question. They're worried about safety. Last time someone was fatigued, they fell asleep. This is the safety bucket. And so what you do is you have these questions, these answers that will answer 10 or 15 different questions where the crux comes down to safety, quality, return on investment, financial, money issues. It's called the bucket model. Henry Kissinger made it famous. What questions do you have for my answers? He had his 15 prepared answers that would cover any question that would be asked. But every now and then, you have the leaky bucket. What if you don't know the answer? You get a valid question. You've done the scope. I'm here to talk about this. I'm not here to talk about that. So I'm not talking about the question outside of scope. This is a question you should know. So here's some ways to answer if you don't know the question. Don't bluff it or make it up. Agree to find out. When you find out, make sure you get back to everyone in the room. So if you ask me a question and I say, let me send you an email, and everyone else hears the question and they say, wow, good question, Sue. I need to get back to everyone on this webinar. I've got everyone's email. Good question, Sue. Let me find out and I'll get back to you. Ask a colleague in the audience. This is called phone a friend. I haven't read that journal article yet. I haven't read that piece of information. Does anyone in the room know the answer? Really good question. I have a colleague who may be able to answer that for me. Or you can ask anyone in the audience. The question may be outside of scope, and find out and get back. One thing to do is to have an eloquent response saying that you don't know, as opposed to that panic, that drained look, that body language that says, holy cow, you've caught me out. So, yeah, thanks for that. It's a really good question. I don't have that data at my fingertips at the moment. I can get hold of it within 24 hours. Let me get back to you. Our politicians take questions on notice and they get back to Parliament within 72 hours. If you don't know, find out and get back to the audience. But remain calm and remain confident. Don't bluff. Don't make it up. And when you do get that good question that you don't know the answer, add this question to a new bucket. It's okay to be caught out once. I don't think it's good to be caught out more than once. So, some general tips for Q&A. Do your preparation. Who's going to be in the room? The eloquent model, repeat the question, make it relevant to everyone. Keep it simple, eye contact with everyone, and thank the questioner, close them out, or does that answer your question? Can you add any more? If you don't know, don't bluff. Find out and get back to them. And the bucket model is kind of frequently asked questions where you prepare that beautifully scripted response. And it answers multiple ways of asking the same question. Lots of workshops coming up. Port Hedland next week, Karratha in October, Darwin in October, some Perth workshops in September. So please share these around with any colleagues. So remember, it's your preparation for your Q&A that will help you, and using a structure, using a model will make you more effective. Your Q&A can determine whether your entire presentation, your entire message is taken away and accepted and adopted by your audience. Don't treat your Q&A lightly. It's not just an off-the-cuff, impromptu speaking, scattergun, spray and pray opportunity to say a little bit more about what you think. People judge people on how well they respond to targeted questions. So take one or two things away from today and practice your Q&A. And if I can be of any further assistance, send me an email, and I hope to see you